Good morning and welcome to Spoken Word. I'm in the studio with Joffa and Melissa, and today's edition is the book Joffa, Isn't That Life? Welcome to the studio, Joffa and Melissa.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
And Joffa, how about we just get cracking with a read from the book to begin with to give the listeners a sense of the novel.
Road is long, with a many windings.
Getting dragged down the passageway by the hair whilst being screamed at by a crazy lady wasn't unusual in my household. The crazy lady is my mother. He suffered from various mental illnesses. She was up one day and down the next 2 days. Unpredictable, frightening, and very much violent. I have a great understanding of what it means when someone says they come from a broken, or, for the want of a better word, dysfunctional family. I never in any way want to seek retribution on the world because of my upbringing. I could never harm a child mentally or physically the way my siblings and I were harmed. Am I scarred because of my upbringing? Yes, I think I am, in the sense of feeling angry and embarrassed, sometimes lonely and other times frightened. Luckily for me, I've always been able to handle adversity, learn from it and move on. I am not a nasty person because of my upbringing. I'm very much the opposite. But my recollections of mother are not positive. I will call her mother because I never really got to know her. I cannot call her mum, which is a wonderful term of endearment. My mother showed no love. She was not a mum. She was a callous and cruel mother. Father was a bit of a drunk. Like mother, I cannot call him dad. I never had that wonderful relationship that a son should have with his father. We never sat back and chatted like a father and son should. We never fished or went camping together, and he never gave me words of wisdom on life. He never encouraged, never ever complimented me, or hugged me or told me he loved me. That was my father. He was a quiet sort of bloke, to be honest. I never really knew him either. I'm not who my father was, although to be fair, I'd probably say I got my tidiness from mother and work ethic from father. Sometimes, though, he was just as cruel as mother. Even now, at times, I yearn for a father figure, someone I can look up to, reflect upon troubles, ask for advice, go fishing with, the stuff that people associate with normal, functioning families. Father listened and always obeyed mother. She ruled the household with temper and tongue, and at times with violence. Father was always employed someplace, either driving trucks or being a postie. In those days, he drove trucks for CIG. That's how things worked. Father did the toiling, whilst mother stayed at home. We lived in a scarily clean household. Everything had a place, and everything must be kept in its place. The houses we lived in were something like institutions, really. The lounge would consist of a couch and armchairs with the television in the corner. The bedrooms just had beds, a dressing table, and bedside chair. The kitchen had tables and chairs. There were never any added extras to give it a homely appearance. Tea time every night, regardless of what day it was, would be 5 p.m. sharp. Lunch times rarely took place. In summer, during school holidays, we would be ordered out of the house at 9 a.m. and told not to return till 5 p.m. tea time. If we were late, we wouldn't get dinner. We were not allowed to go to bed until mother had all our clothes arranged on a bedside chair for the next day. Weet-Bix was placed in a bowl with spoon at the ready on the tea table for breakfast. Funny how things changed back. Back then it was a tea table. Now it's called a dining table. When we all watched television together, like we did every night, straight after tea, we would be frog marched from the kitchen to the lounge room. If we happened to glance at mother whilst watching television, and if mother had happened to witness that glance, she would bark at father for us to stop it. Father would then holler at us, "If you keep looking at mother, you can get to the effing bed." To let you know how serious he was, his shoe would fly across a lounge room, hitting you in the face most times. I cannot recall, not even once, mother wrapping me in her arms, whispering the words, "I love you." She was a stranger as much as father was a stranger. Father was weak. He never ever stood up to mother. He was always at her beck and call. Mother was an expert at abuse. Verbal abuse is a silent killer. When delivered at measured amounts, it belittles you and crushes the soul. When self-esteem is damaged, it can be very much in disrepair or beyond repair. Constantly being screamed at, "You're worth nothing," and "Don't know why I bothered giving birth to you," followed by threats of physical violence, leave scars. I can see why my brothers and sisters have somewhat been permanently damaged. Whilst Mother would go into a rage, Father would sit back in front of the telly and pretend nothing was happening. He had, in time, not bothered to get involved. Once in East Preston, when my older sister Jennifer had said something Mother didn't like, he picked up the teapot board and hurled it at Jennifer. He split her head open. Grandma was a sweet, dear old soul. I'll always remember her with great affection. She loved turf cork tip ciggies with a glass of beer. She lived on top of a butcher shop in Seaford, a place I visited on many occasions. Whilst writing his book, I went back to where Grandma lived, in her dwelling above the butcher's. I leaned over the fence and whispered, "Love you forever, Grandma." Grandma had that well-worn look on her face. I can only imagine the hardships she suffered going through life. I'm sure the worry about her grandchildren was a likely factor in her death. She always gave me 5 cents, and believe me, back then 5 cents to a young child was as good as it gets. You could purchase 4 licorice squares for $1. Chuck in 6 candy-coated licorice bullets for another $1, and you were well on your way to a delicious feast. I like Grandma. You could sit at the tea table and help yourself to a glass of lemonade or butter a sandwich without being abused. She would smile and say, "That's okay, lovey." She was poor and never had much, but she was rich in heart.
Record mode, and I'll just see how it
Okay.
sounds off the internet.
The road is long with a many winding turn that leads us to knows where, who knows where. But I'm strong enough to carry him. Oh yeah, he ain't heavy. He's my brother. So on we go.
And that's the Hollies. He ain't heavy, he's my brother. We're in the studio with Joffa, and the book Isn't That Life? We're hearing readings from today, and Melissa from Busybird Publishing, who helped to put together this book with a lot of great work in collaboration with Joffa. Joffa's well known to listeners as, say, a Collingwood. How would you describe yourself in that way, Joffa? A Collingwood identity?
I've had many descriptions. Yes.
I think it'd be best to leave it up to you, yeah.
I think I just a Collingwood bloke will do.
A Collingwood supporter, eh?
Yeah, Collingwood supporter, absolutely.
Yeah.
We've all got a bit of Joffe in us at Collingwood.
That's right,
Yes.
yeah. But Joffe is also well known in the community for his community work through his work with organisations such as RecLink, and also increasing awareness about epilepsy through the Epilepsy Foundation, and also his description in Joffa's book about his own personal experiences with homelessness.
And I guess it also reflects a lot on mental health issues. My mother was terribly ill, mental health-wise. See, back in these days, we never talked about mental health like we do today.
And the treatments available weren't very good back then. And,
no. Well, in fact, in most cases, the shame was that great to have a mentally ill person in your household that they would be institutionalised. You would hide them rather than have people talking in the street. You know, that family has a retarded child, and the word retarded, which is terrible, was commonly used back in the 60s and 70s.
Yeah, people would make fun of the blue bus and things like that.
Oh, absolutely. Terrible stuff.
Discrimination.
Absolutely. We've grown up a lot in the last 30, and we had to. We had to grow up in a lot of areas with domestic violence, mental health.
Would you like to read another part from the book?
Oh, thank you. I'd love to.
Thanks, man.
A Lambie Children's Home was a convenient place for those who were not fit or, for whatever reason, were unable to look after their children. One Christmas Eve, a big storm came across Melbourne in the evening, huge claps of deafening, savage thunder with ferocious lightning. Father had come to visit with one of those lolly Christmas stockings. As we were saying goodbye, the storm hit the parkland surrounding Allambie. I wet myself in fear, urine soaking my shorts, literally trickling down my legs. For God's sake, Father screamed, what am I going to do with you now? You stupid little bastard, what will they think of me? Father kept on saying this over and over again. I was returned to the reception area for staff to comfort and care for me. Father was so annoyed he left without giving me the Christmas stocking full of lollies. My stay in the children's home forever shaped my life and my love for Collingwood. I fell in love with Collingwood at first sight. This was a castle of dreams, not just a suburban footy ground. It looked so huge. I put that down to the fact that I was small and it was my first ever visit to any football stadium. I discovered Victoria Park was not that big when I was older. It was a pokey joint, but I still loved it. I was mesmerised by the bloke on the boundary line waving a white rag to get the crowd behind the team, and the stands would then erupt with barracking. I watched him and loved him. There was so much to love about Collingwood. The bloke at full forward with long black hair wearing number 6. The noise of the crowd when this guy went anywhere near the football was insane. At half-time, you would have something delicious to eat, like a hot dog, and then they would run out and play again. How good was this? How was I to know that this day would change my life forever?
Joffe, you mentioned a Allambie Children's Home. What was that place like, or what was it?
It used to be in East Burwood. I remember quite clearly. It was a home for children, boys and girls. It was a place for wards of the state. We were made wards of the state several times when Mother was admitted to Larundel or Mont Park psychiatric hospitals. So we would become wards of the state, and that meaning the state was looking after us, would take care of us. I remember the place well. It was one big room would have 8 to 10 beds on each side of the wall. The windows, you would have to tiptoe on top of the bed to look out. Looking back now, Allambie must have been a heaven for us because we would get food, delicious food. We wouldn't be abused. And I think at the time we went to school at Allambie because we were from East Preston at the time. So there was so much to like about Allambie, although it would have been so institutionalised back then. But if you're comparing that to the household, and I'm saying Allambie was better, that gives you a bit of insight into how bad the household was. So Allambie didn't worry me. In fact, I probably would have been happy if I had him grown up at Allambie and moved on at 16 or something.
Good old Collingwood forever. They know how to play the game. Side by side they stick together to uphold the Magpies' name. See the barrackers are shouting as all barrackers should. Oh, the premiership's a cakewalk for the good old Collingwood.
You're listening to Spoken Word on Community Radio 3CR. The book today is Joffa, Isn't That Life? Would you like to read us some more, Joffa?
Thank you, I would, Peter. My second year into being a teenager, I returned home about 5 one evening to find my worldly belongings strewn across the front lawn. Not that I had many, a pair of shoes, some shirts and jeans, along with a framed picture of Peter McKenna. Knocking for what seemed like an eternity had brought a response from behind the closed front door, "Piss off, you're not wanted." I wasn't wanted. The years of physical and mental abuse, it seemed, had come to an end. Should I be relieved or more concerned with what was to come? I was relieved, as my ignorance to being alone, scared and homeless, was yet to play out. Everything would be okay. It had to be. I convinced myself this would be the case. My future right now depended on sensible decision-making, keeping in mind I was 14 years of age. Right now I had to find a place to live, preferably with some type of shelter. My first night was spent in a laneway off Swanston Street, not far from where McDonald's is today. My bed was newspaper laid out on the ground so as not to get too dirty. My blanket was an old, discarded, shrivel-up lady's jacket. I found it in a nearby rubbish pile in one corner of the laneway. Considering all the uncertainty, I slept well. Sometime during the night, a bloke wandered up the lane, dirty in appearance, suffering some type of mental decline. He was very much homeless and stated he was a werewolf. He was a night keeper of unwanted souls, he claimed, who had ventured into the city. I quickly established he was harmless, just some poor lost soul neglected by society. One night a couple of guys snuck into the laneway to take a piss. I covered my face under my arms to block the smell of the steam coming from their urine. In the coming months, I would see many types of people. If I needed any assistance, I would only have to make a wolf-howling kind of noise, and the werewolf would be at my side. The first ever person I would meet while sleeping rough was a bloody werewolf who was going to be my saviour. He would disappear down the laneway, making his werewolf-like noise. In the abandoned warehouse, I met a young guy who was older than me. He was some months away from turning 16 and, like me, had been booted out of home. His name was Stuart. Stewie survived the streets by selling his body down to St Kilda, as he put it. He'd do tricks for $20. He took me under his wing, fed me with food in ciggies, gave me advice and looked out for me. Me and Stewie had our own routine. We would go our separate ways in the morning and meet back at the warehouse each night at 10. During the day, I would just walk around, scab money if I could for feed, read the newspaper, or just read books at the old Melbourne Library. But it was the warehouse that me and Stewie were safe. Many travellers would come through during the night, seeking comfort from the weather or just to rest and sleep. Most of these people were old drunks. Many had a variety of mental problems. I never had much trouble with them. When they saw me and Stewie together, they would simply walk by and leave us alone. One night, Stewie disappeared. Our 10 p.m. get-togethers were no more. I started sleeping rough alone and I became very scared. I returned every night hoping he would be there.
Your best mate at that stage suddenly disappeared. Did you ever find out what happened to Stewie?
Sometime later, I found that Stewie had committed suicide in some sort of an old boarding house down in St Kilda. I knew Stewie wasn't happy about how he was surviving, the means of surviving, but that was the only way he could survive. He dabbled in Valium at the time, and I think he was maybe even starting to experiment with heroin, which would start to make some huge inroads into the street scene back at the time. Yeah, something may have gone wrong with the latest trick or whatever. He may have just decided he'd had enough, which is very, very, very sad. Quite often my mind goes back to Stewie and what he could have been today if he had have stuck it out. And so, yeah, so a big part of my homelessness was the story around Stewie. I often wonder with people like Stewie, I mean, how many people now would even think of Stewie, would even mention his name? Like, obviously, he didn't speak much about his family life, but obviously his parents could be dead by now for all I know. His only friend at the time may have been me, just a poor soul, unknown, and no one would even have a picture of Stewie somewhere. I've
lost a few close friends like that too, and I've had the same experience that it stayed in my head a lot across the years. And when you put it that way, you talk about it that way, maybe that's the point why it has stayed in the memory so much, because it's our job to remember them.
Yes. Yeah. But it'd be nice to think that someone else out there has also got an old picture of Stewie as a young lad on their mantelpiece, or there's a surviving relative sort of thinking, oh gee, if only we could have done more for Stewie at the time, he'd still be alive today. It's very interesting when you start thinking like that. Yeah, and you never know how people touch other people's lives. Like I got together at a funeral of someone once who hadn't suicided, but he was like a street person, and there was all these different people that came together that knew him in different ways. Yes. Suddenly that we'd never met each other until that time, so he had touched many people's lives. Oh, absolutely, yes. Yeah. Yes, there's a lot more to homelessness than what people realise, and the characters that survive homelessness, and it's sadly the characters that don't. I am not in love, but I'm open to persuasion.
When you think of community, think of 3CR. When you think of radio, think of 3CR. This is Joan Armour Trading asking you to support your community radio station, 3CR, the only alternative.
But with a little I could hold my head back and really laugh, really laugh. Thank you.
I was in the lounge room with some friends. It was a Saturday morning and the Pies were playing at the MCG. I was living in Cranbourne at the time. Emma, a young teenager, was in her room. Emma, my daughter, getting ready to come to the football with us, as she did most weekends. Like most teenagers, she took 4 hours to get ready, just to go to a game of football. I never understood what took so long, but I just shrugged and muttered, it's a girl thing. You never from experience bark at a teenager for taking too long to get ready. It only invited a world war. The sudden bang crash noise that came from Emma's room told us something wasn't right. The lounge room was a fair way from the bedroom, through one door, on the other side of the kitchen, up the passageway. At the end was her room. That's how loud the noise was. I ran to Emma's room. A parent knowing these things, it's an inner sense, you just know when your child is in danger, and it frightens you to the bone. I didn't knock when I rushed into Emma's room. If things had been well, I would have been greeted with the usual teenage abuse and maybe a flying makeup bag with barked instructions. You knock before you come into my room. But Emma couldn't retaliate in any way. She was on the floor, convulsing, eyeballs rolling in the back of her head. Saliva and blood were frothing from her mouth. We found out later that the bleeding came from a tongue or lip bite, something all tonic-clonic seizure sufferers would be accustomed to. She also had split her eye open after clipping it on the dressing table when she fell unconscious. The furniture in the room had been shoved aside. That's how ferocious the seizure was. Whilst kneeling beside Emma after putting her into a first aid position, waiting for her to come through, I said, Ma, everything is okay. You've just rearranged the furniture. Such was the cruelty of this thing, the sheer reality of feeling so bloody hopeless when someone is having a seizure was and still is a nightmare. A little joke between dad and daughter was comforting for both parties after such an episode. An ambulance was called to take Emma to the hospital, but I knew what it was. I had seen seizures before as a teenager while living in boarding houses. Every now and then, during breakfast or tea time, someone have a seizure or a fit, as they are also known. I don't like the word fit. There are too many ignorant jokes making fun of epilepsy. The word fit I detest. Anything that would find funny about this horrible illness I detest. Despite this, the shock of that first seizure will live with me forever. It's a strange thing, epilepsy. Such is the stigma and misunderstanding. No one dares to talk about it unless someone else does. Then you hear, oh yes, my dad has it. My uncle had it for a while. Yes, my mum suffers from epilepsy. It appears that most people know someone who has had it or currently suffers from it, which begs me to ask, why do we shy away from epilepsy? It has been around since day one, and yet we still don't know much about it. Granted, it's not glamorous. It can be horrific to see someone suffer a seizure for the first time, or any time for that matter. The noise associated with the convulsing and frothing of the mouth can be very confronting for many people. For some, it's easier just to walk away and let someone else worry about it. But I beg you, if you have taken the time to read this chapter in the book, please do not walk away from a person having a seizure.
Melissa, from Busybird Publishing, you helped Joffa put together this book, and a certain percentage of the book sales goes to the Epilepsy Foundation.
That's right.
That's fantastic. And you've worked closely with Joffa during the writing of this book. What moved you about Joffa's descriptions about his relationship with his daughter and how he writes about that?
Because there's such a misleading perception about Joffa and who he is, I think people seem to think of him as being more of a one-dimensional person when there is so much more to him. And I think what drew me to this book was finding out all these different sides of what makes Joffa Corfe. And one thing that I picked up immediately was the strong connection that he does have with his daughter Emma and his grandchildren as well. He's a real family man, which I think speaks volumes considering the background that he unfortunately does have, that he did go through. He's certainly not one to make excuses for his actions or behaviour for that. He's instead used it to help other people and help his daughter, and he's an ambassador for the Epilepsy Foundation, which I don't think a lot of people know about. He does take part in so many different charities and causes. So when he said that he wanted the Epilepsy Foundation to also benefit from this book, we jumped on board. And the fact that the book's even got a bit of a first aid page at the back that you can tear out, which is there to help other people, so if you do see someone having a seizure on the street, you know what to do, which can help save a life, which I think's tremendous.
Yeah, because stigma or whatever comes about through ignorance when people don't understand, but when you tell the story and you tell it from the heart like you have, and what I get out of reading and listening to Joffa read today, like at the start, you're talking about a broken home, which it very much was, with your mum with mental illness and a lot of violence in the family. But in your generation, you've got a very solid home. You're there for your daughter when she's going through that experience right from the very word go, and you're your arms around her, and it's a loving family. So you've turned your upbringing into the solids at a home that everyone wants. Yeah,
I think we're often a product of our upbringing, but I very much wanted to be not a product of my upbringing. So I've actually gone 360 degrees to make sure that won't happen. So I'm quite pleased about that.
And that's a lifelong journey to get to that point, isn't it?
Yes, it's still a
stronger
journey
every day.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Well, life's a journey until it ends.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Joffa, for coming into 3CR. And Melissa, would you like to give the details for the book or Busybird Publishing?
Certainly. Thanks, Peter. So Joffa Isn't That Life is available from selected bookstores. But you can also go to www.busybird.com.au, $25, and 10% of the proceeds do go towards the Epilepsy Foundation.
Terrific. You've been listening to Spoken Word, and coming up next is the great program Talkback with Attitude.
The road is long.